Real estate associations hate this one weird trick. I'm kidding. That's not actually the title. The title is One Page Buyer Representation Agreement. And here it is. We're looking at a single page buyer representation agreement that you can download. I will put a link in the description and you can download a fillable PDF for your own use. You can share it, disseminate it, whatever you want. It's available for anyone to use. And there's also a 2-page version. And I'll explain the difference between these two. This is the 2-page version right here, and you can decide which one you prefer to use, 1-page or 2-page. Now, of course, this is in light of the coming requirement of agents that are a member of the MLS to use a buyer representation agreement. Remember that the MLS is saying that they have a tentative implementation date of July 15th in which all members of the MLS must use a buyer representation agreement when working with the buyer. Now, the common complaint is that this form is a bit much. So here is the buyer representation agreement as it stands currently, and the form's only 3 pages, although it's quite dense. It's a lot to look at, and it's a bit much to present to a buyer that you're just beginning to foster a relationship with. Now, of course, if every agent is going to require a buyer to sign it, then the buyer has no choice. They're going to have to sign it. But it doesn't make it much less intimidating because, look at all this. Look at all this dense legal speak. And that now, of course, this form's 3 pages, but it's 13 pages in a bundle because when I download this form off of my Zip Forms or Wolf Forms, whatever they're calling it now, application, it's 13 pages. And these are disclosures that are redundant. You see these in the residential purchase agreement. Look at all this. I know it's done in good measure, but this is ridiculous. This is too much. All of this on here, it's so silly, the amount of disclosures. And again, I know from being a broker compliance officer that it's in good measure, but this doesn't need to happen just yet. Again, these are in the purchase agreement. All right, so if you want to use a single page buyer representation agreement, here it is, and I will go through it very quickly. You can download it, you can fill it out. So we'll get started. You'll put the name of the buyer up top right here. You'll put the name of your brokerage right here. And then you'll put the compensation. Now, number 1 is a percentage of the sales price. I just checked this box and I put 2.5%. Of course, you can check this box and write in a flat fee, or you can do a percentage of the sales price and a flat fee, or you can check this and write in other. So you can put in any compensation you want. Now, representation period, and this is very important because if you leave the start or end date blank, it can make this form unenforceable. So make sure that you put a beginning or start date and then an end date for the representation period. Now, here's the most important part. So in addition to compensation, of course, that is the most important part, but this is a huge provision that's very important, and this addresses the buyer's obligation to pay that compensation. So it says compensation is due to broker upon successful completion of a purchase transaction defined as the buyer being recorded as the new owner of record, or upon the successful completion of a lease transaction defined as a landlord, lessor, and tenant lessee both signing a lease agreement. Now, buyers, of course, are going to see this and say, well, am I 100% obligated to pay this compensation? And then you tell the buyer, and it's underlined here so you can point to it because we know exactly that buyers are going to ask this, and we need to be able to point it out and reassure the buyer, maybe, but here's why. Any transaction-related compensation paid to the broker from any source other than buyer shall be deducted from the amount due from the buyer as stipulated in this agreement. So that means if a listing broker is offering a 2.5% commission and you have 2.5 here, it cancels it out. The buyer owes nothing. If you have 2.5% here, but you're only being paid 2% by the listing broker or by the seller or whomever, then the buyer will still owe you 0.5%. So that's why it says deducted, because this is the buyer's obligation, and then any other compensation is deducted from the amount that the buyer owes. And of course, it says buyers obligated to compensate broker upon successful completion, okay? And then down here, it says that if within 30 days, from the end of this representation period, if the buyer enters into a transaction for any property that you showed or marketed to the buyer, then you're still compensated. And you can even change this and write 90 days if you want. But 30 is the default or the standard. And then it has some information about broker duty. Buyer understands and agrees to the compensation terms and acknowledges receipt of this document. And that's it. Now the buyers sign, and then you're going to put the brokerage name here. Print your name as the agent or associate broker, your name as the agent/associate broker, and that's where you're signing. Date, license number of the brokerage, your personal license number, address of the brokerage, telephone, email. That's it. A single page. And you can point out, this thing's very easily dissectable with your client. Now, I'll jump over here because this is almost the same form. It's 2 pages though, but it has some dispute resolution provisions in it. So if you must have a single page buyer representation agreement, well, use this. If you want a little bit of protection in terms of dispute resolution, we'll look at the difference. So it's the same form, same thing we just saw. I won't go through it again. That would be boring. But I'll talk about the difference, dispute resolution. And it basically talks about the venue. And now, if the prevailing party shall be awarded reasonable attorney fees and court costs from non-prevailing party. Now, there's a mediation clause. If anything goes wrong, the parties agree to mediate. And then both parties can initial at the bottom. Now, it says broker initials. It's not actually the designated broker that needs to initial. It's whomever's filling out this form. It's the agent or associate broker. It's the representative, the agent of the office working on behalf of the brokerage. Okay, both parties initial. Then, just like in a purchase agreement, there's an arbitration clause where if mediation fails, the parties can elect by initialing, they must elect to go to arbitration if mediation doesn't work. That's it. That's the difference. And then the parties will sign, and then you'll put the brokerage name, and your signature. And that's the 2-page document. Now, it's possible that if you have this 1-page buyer representation agreement and your broker's adamant about bundling it with some of these, fine, bundle it. Print these out a la carte. Print these disclosures a la carte. This is so funny. This is already part of the purchase agreement. So many of these. And then some of these are just extra. Why not make this 100 pages? You could fill it up. There's a small chance anything could go wrong. There's a small chance you will get in a car accident on the way to seeing a property. There's a small chance a piano could fall on your head, or you'll slip on ice that melted on the kitchen floor when you're touring a property. Of course you can have disclosures for everything. So what's reasonable? Well, it's up to your broker on how much they want to pad a buyer representation agreement with all this. Carr wants a 13-page document. That's fine. That's their prerogative. I don't require that as a brokerage. As in my brokerage, I do not require a 13-page document. Now, in the future, and this 1-page form is going to adapt, and so is this 2-page form. In the future, when the MLS, and the tentative date's July, when the MLS says that we have to use a buyer representation agreement before we open the first door on the first showing, fine, but which one? Because as they're going to, so this will be updated. Mark my words, this form will be updated because there are so many more provisions. Everything that's coming up from the settlement it's a trade-off. It's a double-edged sword. So every new provision they add on to satisfy requirements of the settlement causes a new problem or new issue that will arise or new issue that could become disputed. So this form's going to be redrafted before July. And so will this. I'll redraft it because ideally, agents that are under the requirement can have a 1-page, a tiny form that they sign with their buyer to just get this administrative hoop out of the way, and then continue on with just showing the property, writing offers, and trying to get a deal in escrow. That's it. All right. Again, link in the description. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and please leave a comment.